And we are live. Good morning from Singapore. It is currently 11 a.m. on World Ocean Day. Happy World Ocean Day. I am joined today with Janet Salem from UN SCAP. How are you doing today, Janet?
Very well. Happy Oceans Day.
Happy Oceans Day to everyone watching. I'm sure kind of everyone's waking up and getting lots of news about World Ocean Day, which is absolutely fantastic. And today we'll be talking about rivers and how we clean them, and the work that Janet does with kind of governments and national organizations and multilateral organizations surrounding kind of data and looking at that data in different and introspective ways to help governments and policymakers make informed decisions about how they can stop plastic getting into the ocean. But just before we get into that, Janet, it'd be fantastic to know a little bit more about yourself, your personal background, and how you've ended up in the position you kind of got into today with the United Nations, for the viewers that don't necessarily know who you are.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, I think, when we were just talking before this, you were saying congrats on your new job. But so just about a year ago, so LinkedIn was a bit behind on this. I started a new job to focus specifically on plastic pollution in riverways with the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific in the UN. And that's looking at all these technologies that are available to measure, monitor and prevent marine plastic pollution. But before that, I had a long career with the UN Environment Program, really looking at circular economy and sustainable consumption and production. So I was really upstream from all this, looking at how do you develop the right kind of products and supply chains that have low emissions.
Awesome.
How do you enable sustainable lifestyles and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Amazing. And now you're with the UN SCAP. And for the past 12 months, you've been working on a project called Closing the Plastic Loop, which is actually supported by the Japan government, which I read as well. And this is focusing specifically on marine litter within the ASEAN region, within cities as well. Now, Janet, with kind of the work that you've done, you've got some exciting updates, yes, which you'll get into as well. But it'd be amazing to kind of understand a little bit more about Closing the Loop and the program that you've been running, and potentially some of the data that you've actually collected. So Janet's going to share her screen now and run us through kind of what she's been doing with Closing the Plastic Loop.
Alrighty, so let's make sure I share the right one. Cool. All right, I think it's showing now.
Yeah, it is.
I do want to give a shout out to the government of Japan, because they are supporting this, and I think that they've taken a lot on internationally on this topic, because they're the ones that are behind the G20 Osaka Blue Ocean Vision, which is a vision for having zero marine debris. And so as part of that commitment, although it's an international one, they are looking at how they can support the different leverage points. So Closing the Loop is one of them. And what we're all about trying to get plastic out of rivers. So we are very complementary to 7 Clean Seas. So, but not just any old way. We're looking at sort of 2 objectives. One is that cities, and we're very focused on cities, are using innovation and smart technology to monitor and assess the plastic waste or the pollution that's coming out, so they have the right kind of evidence base. And then once they have that, we're working with them to develop the policy and investment strategies that are applying circular economy approaches to preventing that plastic from getting there in the first place. So it takes a lot of different partners to do a project like this. So it's been a real deep dive into the topics substantively, but also into networking and figuring out how to bring together different efforts in synergy, which can actually be a bit slower than just sort of going for it. And sometimes I envy startups that just sort of have one single idea they can do on their own. They just get in there. That would be very fast for us, but in the long term, I think it'll be much faster to get to our goals if we collaborate. So this is an example of partners just in one city, which is Da Nang in Vietnam. We work in 4 cities at the moment. Da Nang in Vietnam, kind of an ICT ready city. Nakhon Si Thammarat in Thailand, which is like the Venice of Thailand, lots of canals, very beautiful. Surabaya in Indonesia, which is, well, maybe I'll go back. You can see a tiny little map down here. Surabaya in Indonesia, which is known for innovation on plastic waste management. They're the ones that they've got a lot of waste banks that are really innovative, but they also they have that thing where you can pay for your bus tickets using plastic waste. And the mayor, or the former mayor, she was a really huge advocate of plastic waste management. And last but not least, we have Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, which is great. It's great to have a capital city. Amazing mayor. They're really on board with this topic. Anyway, so when we get into one city, we've got a lot of partners. Firstly, we work with the local government. So for us, that's the Da Nang City and the Department of Natural Resources and Environment, which is that focal point. They're obviously the ones that are responsible for the city action plan development and implementation. And then there's us in the UN. We're designing the project, managing, bringing together the partners. Then we have a nice technical institute in Japan called the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies. They do a lot of the baseline reporting and they support the action planning. And then we have technical support from different agencies that are, it might be universities or others that are just knowledgeable in that field and in that city. In this case, it's IUCN. And then the digital tool that we're working on is from Japan Space Systems. But we actually have involvement from a lot of different partners along the way, especially Plymouth Marine Lab and University of Leeds that are helping us with those tools for plastic waste monitoring and measurement.
Amazing.
The project looks like this. There's 3 steps to getting plastic out of your rivers. Step 1, you need to do a baseline assessment, which means calculate how much plastic is actually going into the rivers. That sounds really basic, but yeah, it's an obvious first step. But you also need to know what kind of plastic is it. Is it plastic bags? Is it cups? Is it mostly PET or polypropylene? Like, what characterize that stuff? And then you've got to figure out how did it get there. And so we use a plastic pollution calculator to map out the path that those products took to get there. I'll go into that in a sec. We also do a qualitative baseline assessment because it's really important to know, well, most cities actually have an existing policy framework on plastic pollution or waste management where you can find what they actually had intended to do to start with. And also national level policy, we find out who the stakeholders are, etc. So that's all great. Then we know what's going on in the city. Then we're developing a digital mapping tool, which is basically going to use some of these technologies. We've got the satellite there, we've got mobile phone technologies, we've got CCTV, but it's also GoPros and things that are looking at the rivers. So they're basically the eyes that we need, digital eyes in a way. And they collect a lot of images in different formats, and then they get processed using artificial intelligence to detect the plastic and to try to do sort of a quantification and a location of it. And then we get some nice hotspot maps. And that will help us know how we're going with the actual goal, which is preventing that plastic pollution to begin with, particularly into the rivers. And all of those things help us with the city action plan. So the baseline assessment tells us what are the priorities we actually need to work on. The digital mapping tool helps us monitor how it's going. So might speed up a bit. So on that identification of the hotspots, I'll just give you a couple of examples of the questions here. We want to know which products ended up as water pollution, and that's very different to which products are ending up as plastic waste. So some types of products are more likely to get into rivers than others, like a plastic bag. It's lightweight, it flies off, doesn't have a lot of value to recyclers, so no one's keeping a specific eye on it, and they're just everywhere. But we also want to know where in the waste management process did they leak into the environment. So in some cities, it's while they were, so some cities it's illegal dumping. In some places, it's while they made the plastic made it to a bin, but then they didn't get picked up on time. There was a monsoon, wind got it out, animals picked it out, whatever. Some of them make it on a truck, but they fly off the truck, or some of them make it to a landfill, but then again, monsoons lift it off. If it's not sealed, it'll come into the river. Lots of different ways. Yeah. And so that's so great. So one example from Da Nang, the kinds of results that we're getting is the overall like quantities. So we go from 100% of the plastic waste that's actually generated, and we find that 1.3% of it ends up as marine litter.
Amazing.
Doesn't sound like a lot,
no,
but it's about 3 tons per day just going into the ocean from that one small city. In Surabaya, it's 7% of marine litter. That's our initial results. We haven't released them yet, but it can be very different. And then we also find out, well, what products are they? Da Nang actually showed this pretty amazing result, which is that over 50% of the river plastic is plastic bags. And so it makes sense that they actually have national targets to reduce plastic bags use. And even in the city, they also have like a few policies there. So that's really great to have that backed up. And hopefully, as we monitor progress, it'll reduce.
Yeah.
All right. So that's some results. Now, what about the digital tool? It's there to answer different policy questions for us. The questions are, where is the plastic pollution entering into the rivers? How much is there? And how does it move once it's in the rivers? So what we're hoping to do is develop a digital twin of the ocean so that local governments can get this data automatically at low cost and also timely, so they don't have to, do this once every 5 years, but it can be a continuous data set. So we've got to put out a bunch of eyes that I mentioned before, like satellites in particular. We're looking at GoPros or these 360-degree cameras. We're going to mount them on vehicles. So I think you saw a bit like what Google's doing by detecting plastic in Street View. So we can do that as well by putting those cameras on waste management trucks on their routes. There's also a bit of citizen science where there's some apps that people can use to take photos to locate, quantify, and characterize the plastic. And we can just send people out to bridges and have them count periodically. That's actually a really good way to ground truth. All that data, we're talking about big data, we're talking about it could be potentially very messy, so we need to organize it and process it. That's where the artificial intelligence comes in. So you got to train algorithms to detect the plastic. It's different in satellite data, which is not just visual light, it's different kinds of light or radiation. And plastic has a very, very special spectral signature, I'm told. It's easier to identify than a lot of other things. And then, but from the cameras, it's the usual, just image detection, like, your Face ID on your iPhone. And then you also need a really good data sharing system to organize that data, make it interoperable. It's got a cloud-based. And then you'll get maps like this. So we're also working on the visualization. I think what we've got isn't 100% yet, but showing where those hotspots are so cities can go and target it. I just want to give a shout out to the International Ocean Colour Coordinating Group. This is a group of space agencies getting together to tackle the topic. So it's NASA, European Space Agency, JAXA, which is the Japanese Space Agency. We've got the Indian Space Agency. And then we have people like the Plymouth Marine Lab and all these universities that are just really, really good at this topic. And they're going to coordinate, because if they do it all together, it'll just go much faster. But they're basically looking at which sensors work best. That's the technologies. They're going to coordinate on the algorithms so that we're not all training algorithms separately. How to organize the data so that we can all share it and we can add to it rather than having everything different. And then I'm in this interdisciplinary aspect, which is that, okay, how do you bring that type of information to practitioners like yourself, like me, like governments, so they can use the data?
Absolutely. I mean, the data that you're kind of collecting with the aggregation of these space agencies, which is extremely cool, by the way, as a massive fan of space. It's a very awesome kind of initiative. But yeah, it's almost invaluable because of the solutions that we have and the solutions being innovated and kind of generated by businesses. For example, the river plastic recovery system that kind of we're developing. I mean, that as a data collection platform, but then also as a tool to clean up this data. We'd use things like this to find the best place to position and to what rivers to work on as well. So absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, sorry. We want to take out the guesswork so that
Yeah.
people like you can sort of get on with, the area that you're specialized in, without having to sort of worry about collecting a lot of data and doing all of that homework. We kind of want to accelerate all these efforts that people are doing. So hopefully this will make some big leaps on this topic. I'd love it if you could just like go into your little map online and just check where that plastic is today or last week, and then you can sort of address it how it see fit.
Absolutely. In terms of deploying our system, if as we're scaling up in the future, if we could just log on to a map and see where high amounts of plastic pollution is coming from on a regular basis, and just decide that without having to do kind of months of environmental impact assessment and assessing the data and seeing whether it's going to be kind of, I guess, whether it's going to make business sense to put a system in that river. We could just log on and see, okay, UNSCAP and the space agencies have seen this river with huge amounts of leakage. And I think that's going to be so comprehensive and really needed in the future as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also sets a nice baseline. So if you're collecting X amount of plastic, you'll be able to say, well, that was, 10% of the release of that day, or more, hopefully. Yeah, but it really helps you measure impact as well. So I'm very excited about this one.
Yeah, that's exciting.
But for everyone, I think, so we've been talking about taking action. That's also the next step. We're just starting it with Da Nang and Kuala Lumpur. But what we're finding is that once you have that information, it's so much easier to develop your action plans. So for instance, these are just 3 of the ones for Da Nang. The obvious one is reduce the use of single-use plastic bags, but we actually have the why. We know that it's the largest type of marine litter in Da Nang, not the case in other cities, and it aligns with the national goal to reduce plastic bags. And then we also then include a section on how do you actually achieve it. There's a big difference between a policy goal, which is reduce the plastic bags use, and the policy instruments that you use to reach that goal. 2 very different things. So yeah, obviously bans, taxes, levies, or supporting alternatives or voluntary agreements with the retail sector. We're also able to just sort of show how to, where, why, how to increase the waste collection coverage, because we knew from the calculations that open dumping by residents that didn't have waste collection was causing 20% of the emissions. So it makes a good case to extend that public service. And another one was like improving waste storage. So as I mentioned, it's such a shame that plastic could be collected for disposal, but it's not getting picked up in time. So or the bins are too small, and so it's leaking at that point. So it's accounted for 14%.
It's such a simple kind of solution as well. Bin right sizing, looking at plastic leakage and looking at comprehensive plastic leakage studies. It's such a simple solution. I think with kind of the data that you are gathering, I think cities can then make really informed and kind of accurate, precise decisions on really simple initiatives to implement to really increase the amount they're collecting. So, I mean, using the data for that purpose is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, hopefully also, companies that are trying to become plastic neutral can also then interact with this data and say, okay, well, if we want to be plastic neutral, maybe what we're going to do in our work in Thailand or in this part of Thailand is we're going to focus on adding waste collection services, or supporting NGOs or supporting governments who need more money to collect, to have bigger bins, to collect them more often, whatever increases the amount of storage to reduce this 14%. That could be a target. Or we'll focus on extending the waste collection to new areas that hadn't been serviced. So anyone can come in and provide solutions.
That's actually a fantastic point, because I think as kind of, this is looking at a very general kind of country level scale. But as you really break it down, and one thing that we've been working on internally at Summer Clean Seas is a plastic kind of leakage analysis of corporations. So you have a large company and they want to understand how much they're contributing to this specific statistic that they have. And I think then you'll be able to really break it down and have that really granular data, so you can see how much each company should be proportionately contributing to this cause within this country or within this area. So that's actually a really interesting kind of angle to potentially look at it, especially when dealing with either EPR schemes or plastic crediting schemes. It makes informed decisions.
I think so. I mean, I've had interesting discussions with, for instance, Unilever. You've got a big company that's interested in reducing the marine debris footprint, I guess, of their products. And you have sustainability teams that genuinely want to create an impact when it comes to, I mean, I could put it also, they want to mitigate an impact when it comes to plastic waste. But it's really too much to ask that those people then conduct an entire study to quantify plastic waste in a country. Yeah. So even for them to know what to do, is just to see, okay, here are the products, here's where it's failing, here are the sources. Therefore, where we think we can go in is in X direction. So kind of do want to take the guesswork out, and I just also reduce the chance of people putting genuine effort into this that has no impact or minimal impact.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's the perfect, it's almost the perfect combination that with what you're doing. You're enabling governments to make informed regulations about plastics. You're then allowing companies to really have a look and be able to analyze that data and see how much they, see what works and see what doesn't, which is a massive issue. And then also what that then enables the consumer to do, which is the third part of this story, is then say, okay, well, actually, the corporations are changing what material they're making it out of, which makes it easier for the consumer to then, look at certain kind of recycling waste streams and be able to separate their waste easier at kind of on a consumption level. So then you've got these three players within the plastic pollution issue really working together to kind of make informed decisions and hopefully kind of decrease the amount of plastic within that area.
Yeah, consumers will have such a huge role to play. I mean, even just this one on reducing the use of single-use plastic bags. People still need to carry stuff. I mean, especially in Southeast Asia, it's not only your groceries, it's also takeaway food. The culture is to get food from outside and bring it in. So what are the alternatives to single-use plastic that are hygienic, that are strong enough, that are, all the convenient, cheap, etc. And so I think here, when we support alternatives to single-use plastics, not only bags, but also coffee cups, we love our takeaway coffee cups all over the world. We need to support alternatives to that. And that's where the consumer does have to play a role. Because if those goods and services, those alternatives are available in the market, doesn't mean the consumer is actually going to use them.
Yeah, very true. Very, very true. And I guess it's that kind of, you can't always rely on the consumer to pick the best option. Sometimes they're just going to pick the easiest or the cheapest option. And I think that's then kind of a behavioral side on the consumers, but then also an informed decision and education from the company to the consumer. That communication line needs to be crucial, really. But I mean, You've kind of delved into some aspects. Is there anything else kind of from the data side that you're getting out of your UNSCAP presentation here?
Well, there's a lot. I mean, we've focused on getting the methodologies right, and we actually over the past year, to be honest, we've had so many interesting conversations. We've had a really steep learning curve. It's sort of a shame to keep it all to our little team. And you didn't know this when you asked me to speak today, but today we are launching our e-learning course on preventing marine plastic pollution. So anyone can do it. It's free of charge, and it's basically a step-by-step process that all the experts that we've been working with, they've all developed a module on how to do their part. So it's free of charge. Said to you earlier, we did nerd out. We did make it long-ish. So we could have gone for a shorter, like a 2-hour version, but we thought when you've got Lauren talking about satellites, how to get satellites to detect plastic waste, and she's showing you how she goes hunting for plastic. Those are actually really cool videos and really nice explainers on that. So it's 7 modules. It's about 15 hours, we think. You can reach it with this URL, escap.org/projects/CTL for closing the loop. I'll just quickly run through the modules because this is our how-to. It's basically our how to get plastic out of rivers. So there's a bunch of stuff. There's actually a lot of work. So the first one is the 101 on cities and marine plastic pollution. Basically, here we're saying why we think cities are really at the front line of this fight against marine plastic pollution.
Amazing.
Then we talk about the plastic value chain from source to sea. So you might have seen in the news, some people are blaming the fast-moving consumer goods companies. Some people blame the polymer producers. Some people blame everyday citizens. So this sort of breaks down who is involved along that whole plastic value chain and where it can sort of, where the circularity is lost and why we have this problem. All right. Then some of that data that I showed earlier, how to measure plastic pollution. We've got the University of Leeds on this one and the International Solid Waste Association. They're going to break down how do you use the plastic pollution calculator to quantify and classify urban plastic pollution. So that one's a good one, especially for anyone who's sort of actively working in this field. And Dr. Costas, the man himself, is doing the lectures. He's a character. Okay, then we get funky. We go to detecting waste from land and space. So that's where Lauren comes in. She's from Plymouth Marine Lab. She's been in National Geographic, and Tim from Wageningen University in the Netherlands. We've got KO University on the AI. So you sort of learn how to go hunting for plastic using remote sensing and AI. You're going to take this course, Ben?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, engaging with the informal sector is definitely definitely one thing that we're looking to tackle. But no, this is absolutely fantastic. I think the modules that you're kind of pulling together is amazing. But how many modules are there out in total? 7. 7. So this one, informal sector, super important. As you know, in Da Nang, actually we found that only the informal sector is recycling. Super important people to engage. Wow. Mm-hmm.
Engaging stakeholders. This is where we get the private sector in, and our good colleagues and my former colleagues in UNEP are talking about that, how to get different stakeholders involved. And lastly, that local action plans that I mentioned, like what's really important in structuring them if you're a policymaker or if you're supporting a policymaker.
Amazing.
Yeah, so that's how.
It's really excited for you to kind of launch this today on World Ocean Day as well. And I'm sure you're going to get multiple kind of people interacting with that e-learning course. I definitely know I will. I noticed the module 6 actually on the private stakeholders is one that I will definitely be looking into, because obviously we've got the river plastic recovery system. Now, as kind of a researcher in my background as myself, I would love to use that kind of piece of technology for data collection. But then also it's then about how do we engage that wider private sector and potentially FMCG companies and using the data that you've generated to really allow them to help support kind of different collection initiatives or recycling initiatives. So that's one thing that kind of I'm very intrigued about kind of learning from that course. And then also the informal sector as well. When it comes to kind of rivers, people don't really consider how to collect that and how we can make an inclusive ecosystem without potentially using, the informal sector, and how do we formalize the informal sector, when it comes to recovering plastic from these rivers and looking to kind of remove that from the ecosystem. Within the modules, though, we do have a question actually. Within the modules, do you cover what to do once you've collected the plastic out of the river, or whether you can recycle that, or the end of life of those plastics that you've collected? Is that something that's covered within these modules, or something that people have to kind of look into and explore themselves?
Yeah, I think that's covered a bit in the private sector. So module 6 and module 7 is the action plan. But it is an actual area of interest. I have a side project on plastic waste that is using marine plastic to develop, to upcycle them, first of all. Need to undo the damage that's been done by the salt and by the UV, make them tough again, upcycle them into pellets that can be used for 3D printing. Yeah. No,
absolutely. I think that's one kind of challenge to overcome as soon as we, 7 Clean Seas also begins kind of mass scale up of our solution to collect plastic from rivers. It's okay. We've got this waste. I know you don't like calling it waste, Janet, because it's a valuable material at the end of the day, but we've got this waste and we've got huge amounts of it. So what can we then do with that waste, and how can we upcycle it? How can we turn it into something else, or is it, are we finding that actually we can't really do much with it once we've collected it out of the river? And I think that's definitely something that's going to be really interesting to look at from a private sector's perspective, but also, especially from kind of a wider research perspective. What can we do with that waste afterwards? But we've got a couple more questions as well flooding in, which is absolutely fantastic. One question is,
we use puns intentionally. I feel like we're flooding in. We're doing a deep dive as well.
Flooding in, deep dive. I'm full of puns.
Okay, I'm ready for it.
The puns are unintentional actually. But one question is on shipping of plastic waste. Now, have you in kind of your research, have you come across the monitoring or solutions for monitoring the shipping of plastic waste? We've been looking at plastic leakage analysis, but one of kind of the biggest assumptions is that plastic waste is handled in the country it is purchased. Now, this might not be relevant for ASEAN region, but more kind of globally. But kind of what are your thoughts on solutions that monitor this?
Yes, so this is why it's really important to use the right methodologies to measure plastic waste. Did I just see a zoom in? So when you use a material flow analysis based method, never mind what it's called, but it basically means it's sort of an accounting method. So you see what is produced, where does it go? And if you can't account for it in landfill, in recycling, sorry, my hand here. If you can't account for it in landfill, recycling, or marine litter, where did it go? And that's how you can ensure that there's complete transparency. You need these sandkey diagrams that show of all the polymers that are produced, or the plastic products that are imported, if they weren't produced domestically, where did it go? And if you don't know that as a government, then if you don't have transparency on that, then that's a problem. And we know that the UN has introduced restrictions on export and import of plastic waste under the Basel Convention. So this is going to be under much higher scrutiny. It's still legal in some countries, but it will have to be heavily monitored. So I'm not sure exactly what the monitoring systems for that are, but the policies are in place, and hopefully those monitoring systems are either in place as well or coming.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that kind of banning, the Basel Convention is a fantastic thing to ban kind of shipment of plastic waste over borders and things. But I mean, when it does come to the Basel Convention, what do you think the implications are for potential, materials recovery facilities that do sort waste in one country and sort good, high quality plastic waste like PET, HDP, and PP, widely recycled in kind of multiple regions and throughout the globe. But what's the implications for the recycling companies and these collection companies if they have a MRF in one country and a recycling center in another? Do you think that's going to affect their business or affect the recycling rates in either country?
Yeah, like So trade has always been good at sort of making our supply chains more efficient, and there's probably no reason why that doesn't also apply to our waste processing. Maybe it's maybe there's a really good plant over there that can process at an affordable or cost-effective way, or labour prices or whatever. There's a reason why you'd rather recycle it there and ship it over there, especially when it comes to areas where you have smaller countries. So it's not really efficient to have a complete vertically integrated recycling system in one country. Or you could argue that. Or you could look at it from another perspective. I studied engineering, so engineers love a constraint. So they take those restrictions as the given and then try to optimize the system within those constraints. So the recyclers, if you talk to people like in Suez, SUEZ, the French recycling company, they've opened a good circular plant in Thailand. They are ready to recycle, right? But what happens is, for every ton of plastic that enters their recycling plant, about 250 kilograms of it is contaminant. It's not the right kind of plastic, or it's mixed with something else. And so they actually have to go and sort it out. So the implication is, if you want the recyclers to do their bit, you need to separate and collect well, make their job easier. Because the more mixed everything is, the more expensive it is for them. And then remember, they've got to actually sell that recycled plastic on the market and compete with raw materials. So if you mix everything up, make it expensive for them, they just can't really do it.
No, absolutely. I think, that kind of the margins within kind of recycling and waste collection are already so small, and if the waste isn't separated correctly, and increasing those costs in any way, or any unpredicted costs of these companies, it can actually have a detrimental effect, can't it, on recycling rates as a whole.
But I think really, if I can just add to that, it's not only the recyclers, it's the product producers. So the message of the recycler, if you would ask them, is stop producing products, especially packaging, that just isn't recycled. We don't care if it's technically recyclable. If you're not going to get a good price for it, if we're not going to get a good price for it in the market where you're selling these products, if it's not collected well or sorted well, stop calling it recycled. It's just a fantasy. So, stick to aluminium, glass, paper, PET, and make your packaging out of that, because that stuff can be sorted well and it can get a good price.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you on that one. I think, when it comes back to the data that you're collecting as well, it helps companies and it helps governments implement the regulations for the companies to then use the correct materials in the correct way, so we can have these kind of holistic and moving towards circular solutions, especially in kind of this day and age when we have a plethora of multiple different packaging solutions. And if we narrow these down and work on the materials that kind of we have the infrastructure to recycle, it makes it easier for those kind of everyone across the value supply chain. Now we've got another question as well, which is on the educational side, the e-learning, platform that you're kind of launching for UNSCAP, and this is more focused on schools. How is the data that you've collected, how is that used in education for schools? Are there any programs that UNSCAP is working on to kind of for the younger generation, maybe not so much more government focused or business focused or private sector focused?
It's a good question. I would love to work on this topic, because I just see that kids, especially in primary school or high school, certainly at university, like really interested in engaging on this topic. So we don't yet have a program on that. Our awesome colleagues at UNESCO, they do advocate for education on plastic waste. You've got to find Dr. Benno there. He's unstoppable on this topic, especially in Thailand. And we're also seeing corporates getting into this. So it's sort of an interesting thing. Like, should a company, let's say Unilever, should they engage on education because their products are going out there and they need to be sort of handled in the right way, or if they're going to be plastic neutral, or they need to support education. So not yet. Contact me if you're interested, though. I love the idea.
No, that'd be absolutely amazing. You know, that's the next generation that's going to be entering this market and really helping us as they grow up and seeing the results of the work that we are doing and using the data. And you know, we've gone from kind of collecting data from citizen science to using satellites and massive space agency organizations coming together to tackle this topic. Janet, we've gone a little bit over, which is absolutely amazing because we've had so much to talk about. But from kind of the e-learning platform that you're launching, if you just want to tell everyone where we can find that and kind of the links for this and where these will be posted so they can get direct access to it, that would be absolutely amazing.
Yes, it is www.escap.org/projects/CTL. You can go from there, or just Google Closing the Loop and e-learning, and hopefully you'll get it. Maybe we can share a link under the event.
Yeah, fantastic. Janet, it's been amazing to talk to you. We've learned so much kind of from data collection through to governments. We even touched on a little bit about the Basel Convention and policy implementation as well. So a broad spectrum of topics today. But any final closing remarks or just kind of one final takeaway for kind of the audience watching?
Work together. Like, this topic is solvable and we can all do something. So, you know, take the course if you want, inform yourself. You'll definitely come up with some ideas of what you can do in your role. The worst thing is if we try to do things alone. I've seen it, a lot of people working on this topic alone doesn't work. Work together, collaborate, and we can solve the topic. Yeah. Amazing.
Fantastic takeaway. Janet, it's been an absolute pleasure. We will send the links and post the links out to everyone watching and kind of on our social medias later for you to access the e-learning and all the work that Janet is doing as well. But thank you for tuning in. 7 Clean Seas, we've got a fantastic day ahead of us as well with the Economist podcast, which we'll be pushing out at 1 o'clock at the moment, which is fantastic. But yes, once again, fantastic to be with you, Janet, and happy World Ocean Day to everyone out there.
Thanks, Dan. Happy World Ocean Day.